Hello, world. Today we're talking to Josh Armantrout, the product designer over at DOS.com. What I love digging into with Josh was how just a little bit of technical literacy can have outsized impacts on your ability as a product designer to get your design shipped in a productive way. So let's dive in and have Josh take it away. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I'd love to start with you. Can you give us a little bit of kind of your background today and then maybe how you got there?
Sure. Yeah. So I have been designing professionally for 5 years and some change now. I'm currently working at an ERP, an AI native ERP startup based in San Francisco. We're called DOS. Um, Prior to that, I spent like 4.5 years at Bill.com and by way of acquisition of Divvy, a fintech startup that then got acquired by Bill has been in the payment space for, I don't know, I think since the dinosaurs were around or like the early days of the internet, and are still chugging along. And before that, was sort of like, everybody's first couple of crappy startup jobs. And my path into design was kind of a windy one. So I've told this story in varying lengths, but I think the most compressed version of it is uh, my freshman year of college. I spent a bunch of time goofing off and flunked out, and then spent the next 6 or 7 years working various like sales and support jobs until like 2016 to 2018. I was at Capital One and was working in a support role. And it just so happened that the team I was on got partnered up with some designers within the company because we were customer facing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but these were the designers like, we need to get our fingers on the pulse of like what's going on with the customers. And this is our closest, proxy for actually talking to customers. Um, and I I've always kind of had like a natural predilection for getting to the root of problems that I observed in my environment and like within the businesses and functions that I worked in. And so I remember the first time that I was in like a design jam with these designers. uh, it was like my brain was filled with electricity. I was like, holy crap, this like weird thing that I thought was always just like a thing that I did and obsessed about. This is actually like someone's whole job is to like tackle problems like this and design solutions. I knew like, okay, this is what I want to do for my career. I didn't even realize this was the thing. And spent like the next year, 2017 to 2018, trying to like find a way to put myself in the position of like being a design intern at Capital One, and it just never, like, I couldn't get anyone to get on board with that, being like totally unproven and having none of the hard skills. And it was about that time that I reconnected with esteemed podcast guest Ryan Holdaway, or Holdy, as most folks who know him as. And that was about when he had started at Lambda School, and I think he was over outcomes. And so he told me about Lambda School, and I thought, huh, well, that could be the way to like make my way into design. And so I started to look into it, and uh, they were just getting ready to launch their very first design cohort. And I was a little wary of that and like being a guinea pig. And they were on like their 16th cohort of what they called full stack web, their full stack web curriculum. And so I thought like, oh well, like I'll just join and like learn. I'll join this full stack web curriculum, and I can teach myself design along the way, and I'll have this like this skill set that can be a wedge into the tech industry, and like that is the way that I'll make my way there. So quit my job, signed up for Lambda School, and about when we hit React as a framework in studying like front end, I realized like whatever it is that engineers have that makes these concepts click for them, I don't got it. Like, it was the hardest thing that I'd ever tried to learn. And I had friends in my cohort who were like, oh, yeah, I'm working on this side project. And I was like, I want to throw my computer out of the window every day. We were having such different experiences. Uh, and I knew that, like, the actual computer science portion of our curriculum was sort of like looming around the corner. And so I like worked with the leadership of Lambda School to figure out like, okay, what does a reasonable pivot look like for me? Um, and we did some experimenting with like, oh, well, what if I do like the first half of coding and the second half of design, and then we try to market me as an associate PM, and that didn't quite work. And the long story short there is I eventually just like shifted into and completed the design curriculum and used that as the launching point to get like the first crappy startup job that everyone gets when they're finishing a curriculum. And that was like that led to the next slightly less crappy startup job. And it was after that um, I was able to land that job at Divvy, and that was like where I really cut my teeth and uh, you know, launched my career from there. So hopefully that's about as condensed as I can make that version of the origin story.
No, I love it. It's funny. I feel like everyone has such an incredible story about how they got to design. It's like no one, very few people have that sort of linear. I went to school for this, and then I, got out of college and I did a job right away. Everyone's got such an interesting story there. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Interesting to hear that you did study some, maybe not all coding, but some coding.
No.
You got a little, dip your toes into that. Have you found that kind of introduction to the world of coding has been helpful for you as a designer, or do you wish like I never had learned that and it's kind of like a clouded vision, so to speak?
I think it has made all the difference. Like, um, especially in the last, I'm trying to think, the last team that I was on at Divvy and Bill, um, I think I was on that team for like the last two, maybe even 2.5 years that I was there. And it was a team where the relationship between the engineers and the designers that preceded me on that team had been pretty strained. Um, because there were a couple of designers who were like newer in their career and were like pretty dogmatic about adhering to like the design process as they like understood it, and were trying to hold the line and do their job as best they understood to do it. And engineers who like didn't really understand, like it just seemed like process for process sake. And so you had these two groups of people just kind of talking past each other because there was no translation layer. um, and so there were some folks who were like a little like, I don't know, Josh, like this team has had kind of and my pitch to our leadership at the time was like, listen, I'm no engineer, but like I know enough about what's going on under the hood that I'm confident that like I can come in and like have these kinds of conversations with engineers to get myself like the goodwill and clout that we can like mend that working relationship. And this is going to be like a different era for this team. And like that was absolutely the case. And it would not have been the case if, when I sit down and talk about a feature with someone, like if my front end engineer is telling me like, oh, hey, like we can't do this way because like the state management is just not going to work. Do I know how like all the prop drilling works? No. Would I ever know how it works? Absolutely not. That was the kind of stuff that made me want to throw my laptop out of the window. But if you tell me that the state management is the issue there, and we can have a conversation about like, oh, well, is there something in local state that we can manage? Is this a global state issue? Like, how tractable is this problem based on that? How embedded are uh, uh, the code challenges here? Like being able to have those kinds of conversations has made a world of difference to this point in my career, when I didn't really have access to the tools. And now that designers have some code tools available to them, it's like a complete game changer.
Yeah, I love that, and I love how you're right. You don't need to know syntax. You don't need to know all like the nitty gritty details. But if you can just have that conversation and work through the problem together, it's not like they're telling you how to do it. You're not telling them. It's like, oh, let's team up on this and figure it out. Like that's so much more productive than kind of ships in the night, like missing each other there. Um,
100%.
I, are there times though when like you feel like I don't have enough technical knowledge where it's like this is at another level and I really just don't understand it. How do you kind of overcome that and get to that level of proficiency?
I think that's been something that honestly I has been like with beyond my reach prior to like having code gen tools available to me, because there have been times where I've had like a really ambitious idea, or like, something that seemed crazy or far-fetched to me, where like when we sit down to talk about it, the response is like this is a cool idea, but there's just like no way that we can make this work. Like it's just not feasible. And I can appreciate that response, especially when you're like talking about business constraints and timelines, um and even like there's the trope that like, oh, anytime an engineer tells you that, they just like don't want to work hard. And sometimes that might be the case, but like sometimes it's really shorthand for, this is a cool idea, but we just can't reasonably spend the time to try to make this thing work, because we don't know how much time it's gonna, like, we're gonna tank just chasing some idea. And so being able to parallelize that and like me say, okay, totally fine. I get that you're like time constrained. Let me just go fiddle with this. Like, let me go crack open Cursor or crack open Figma Make or one of the other 11 million code gen tools, and like see if I can just hack my way into something that approaches this idea. And like, if I can't get there, fine, whatever. Like, there's some cracked designer or dev out there who maybe could have made it happen, and it's not me right now. But like, if I can get in the ballpark, then I can bring something to you and say like, hey, this is like a functional piece of working code that's in the ballpark of the thing that I was thinking about. Like, is this anything? Like, can we work with this? And like, does that get it? Does that get implemented even 70% of the time? No, because some of the stuff is just like far fetched and not worth it, or it's not performant or whatever. But like, just having the tools to say, cool, I respect your time constraints. Let's parallelize this work so I can go like fiddle with this. And then rather than bringing you like what is essentially a napkin sketch, because that's all that Figma designs really are. Maybe that's a bit reductive, but like for all intents and purposes, it's a paper sketch. Like, to instead say, here's a piece of working code. It's probably going to be ugly because these code gen tools are not making production code unless you're an engineer. But like, can we use this? Is this something? Is just like night and day.
I love that, and I love just showing up with a little more
Yeah.
than maybe than what they're expecting, because I think that just goes such a long way to seeing that idea in production. So what I'm hearing is like really close developer collaboration, showing up with prototypes. What other techniques do you like to use to kind of foster your collaboration with your developer counterparts?
Um, well, it was a little bit different at Bill and Divi than it is now. Like in a smaller startup setting, especially like when I'm here in the office, I can just like, we're in a split level, so I can literally just walk upstairs and like go sit down next to one of our front end engineers, and like we can look at stuff together and like, hey, does this make sense? Like, what can we tweak here? We're in a place right now where everything's been like so fast, and we've been kind of constrained on like design resources before I started, and front end resources. And we're like now getting to a place where it's like, okay, we're moving into an aggressive development phase. Like, we gotta go in and clean some of the standardization of this stuff up. Like, we need to get like a proper theme in here. We need to start to componentize and make some of the stuff more repeatable. um, I have done enough of this now. I've like worked on design systems at Bill and at Divi, and have like gotten deep into the weeds with like components and variables in Figma, that like I was able to learn like, oh, this is when you put a theme together in CSS, like that's all just this stuff. And like, I got deep enough into the storybook instance at Divi and Bill that I got a reasonable understanding of like, oh, here's how these like props, like variant props that you're seeing in Figma actually show up in production code. So like, uh, part of it is proximity, that I can just like go and sit down next to the engineer that I'm working with, and like we can look at it together. And we're like early enough that there's not a huge code base that is so difficult to traverse that I just get like lost in it, and like don't even understand what I'm looking at. And then part of it is just like over time, as I've developed more proficiency with the design tools and have spent more time collaborating with developers on like where those crossing of lines exists, particularly like in the systemization of design. I've just like developed more experience to be able to look at something and go like, oh, hey, like here's part of our code that's really messy where we have to make this same set of styling decisions every time we work on this feature. Like, here's the lightweight way that we could systematize like just a few things. Let me go spin up a storybook instance. Like we can start to wire up all this stuff. And um, yeah, so it's different by way of experience. It's different by way of like I'm in a different context now, but mostly it just comes down to like reps over time and building on the little bit of like the kernel of code proficiency and technical literacy that I had at the start of my career, and just like being able to develop that through exposure to really, really talented engineers who are willing to work with me.
Yeah. I love that you call out reps over time because I feel like sometimes you feel like you're going to show up and it's just going to be this magical collaboration. And it's really like maybe the fifth time, but the first couple are going to be a little tricky. The kind of reflecting on that School of Hard Knocks, have there been times when you tried something and it just didn't work with your developer collaboration? You're like, this is something that I've learned from, and I just don't want to try it again because it just did not work for promoting that collaboration.
Yeah, maybe say more about like, are you referring more to like the like a specific set of like tactics that didn't work, or um, say more about like uh, help me understand that question a little bit
Yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah. No. So, like, I'll start with one of my examples.
Yeah,
I've
please.
tried at very different times to use different levels of Figma and annotations to
Mm,
communicate things to developers, right? Where I've gone really hardcore and like every screen had like six cards next to it that were like, this is the data model, and then this is the user experience. Only to have that get ignored, right? Because they're busy and they're looking at Jira tickets, not Figma designs for their input. So have you tried anything like that where
yeah.
you're like, this is going to be a slam dunk. They're going to love this. And then they were like, actually, this is not right for us.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. And yes, I have gone. I've spanned, I think, maybe the full gamut of highest possible fidelity to lowest possible fidelity, um, which for me is like we're basically getting into red line territory where, yeah, every variant of every single thing is there and it's annotated and there are notes to the nth degree. And what I found more often than not is that is just so much noise in a Figma canvas that it's almost impossible to also shape that up as though it's like a guided tour. You almost need it to be on like a Candyland board to say like, okay, here's how you follow all of my like a beautiful mind scribbles across this Figma canvas. And it just like gets lost in the sauce. And then I've like gone the total opposite direction, which is like I'm taking screenshots of production and we're just gonna like throw a couple of designs on top of it and like jam on this thing together. And what I have found is that there is no like universally successful or universally unsuccessful approach. And what has worked has been like me sitting down with the developer that I'm working with on a given thing and saying, and just like establishing, okay, how are we going to work together? Like what is the thing that you need from me or the things that you need from me for you to like jump into a Figma canvas and be able to interpret my intent, like when we are not sitting together. Um, and like, what do I need from you, vice versa, to make sure that when I am putting stuff into Figma or like when we're talking about something in Slack, that I'm communicating only the relevant bits of information to you and not like feeding you peripheral information that only muddies the waters. And so what I found is that there are some engineers who are like, yes, please, I need you to spell out like every little thing the same way that I want like a super detailed, requirements in my Jira ticket. I just like give me the very specifics and I will go and execute. And then there are some developers who are like, yeah, man, like just design on top of a screenshot. We'll hop on a call and like just jam on this stuff together. Like I'm either familiar enough with the product surface, or I'm familiar enough with you, or whatever, that I don't need a whole lot of fidelity to be able to interpret the intent here and just like crank on it. Um, and so really the only thing that's universally successful is just like sitting down and having the conversation with the engineer that I'm working with to say like, okay, how do we need to work together to make this successful? But because, yeah, in the instances where I try to redline something for someone who's just like, I do not care about that, it's a total waste of time. Um, and vice versa. Like if I deliver something that's lower fidelity, it's also a waste of time because then we have to go back and like layer in a bunch of additional detail that was missing. When like we could have just done that up front and saved a bunch of time and like back and forth about, no, well, no, this is missing. I need to know this, and me filling it in and doing that a few times.
Hmm. I love that. I think it's so true. That's definitely resonated with all my experiences. You've had, I think, the opportunity to work in very different size organizations, which I don't know if a lot of folks have. Have you found that that kind of contextual approach like changes in those different environments, or maybe you hear a lot of the same stuff at a big org that you wouldn't hear necessarily at a smaller startup org?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really interesting about specifically my time at Divvy and Bill was I joined Divvy kind of like right at the early part of their hyper growth stage. So in 2021, when I joined Divvy, they doubled their headcount that year from 250 to 500. So it was just like surging growth. And that was like, that led right into the acquisition where we went from, 250 to 500 to, well, now we're part of Bill. And this whole thing is like 3,000 people. In the transition, like the hyper growth transition was interesting because we were adding people at an insane clip, but most of the knowledge sharing between designers and engineers, between teams around the org, was all kind of like tribal knowledge at that point, which is easy to get away with when you're a small org. Like you don't have to write a bunch of stuff down because you can just go up to somebody's desk and talk to them, and like you don't need a document of your conversation, like it's in both of your heads and you're the only two people who are working on it, so whatever. um, and so that worked for a little bit. uh, when I first joined Divi, like we could have conversations, and uh, if I needed to know about something that wasn't documented, like I could just go track the person down and they were likely still there and we could just talk about it. But even inside of a year post acquisition, there were, ton of early people at Divvy left because, sweet, you cashed your acquisition check. Awesome. Time to take a break, go find the next thing. Uh, and so a lot of that tribal knowledge got lost. Um, and so the whole vibe of how we interacted changed, where there was like way more of an emphasis on documentation, way more of an emphasis on like at, at, at least for me, this wasn't necessarily true of all designers, but I personally felt like a huge sense of urgency to become like very, very literate in not only the details of how my engineering org worked, like as it pertained to design and like the relationship between the two, but like to try to get my hands on as much of what that relationship looked like in the folks who are like in the historical Bill organization. So it was a lot of like, again, because I spent a lot of time working on design systems, that's sort of my like ongoing side quest. I don't really know how that became like my thing, but that was sort of my ongoing side quest at Divvy and Bill. It was a lot of like, spend a lot of time in Storybook and like triaging, like, okay, well, what's the difference between Storybook and like what's in Figma? Because in a lot of cases, those are huge gaps. And like, who are the right designers and engineers to pull together to like get on the same page about this? So the shift from like sharing a bunch of tribal knowledge to and being able to do that in a way that kept your like responsibility for education as a designer like pretty, you could be pretty hands off because like anything you wanted to know you could just go ask an engineer and they could tell you and you're done, to Oh, actually, the responsibility for knowing about this stuff is on me because there are engineers who made this that aren't here anymore. So, like, there are people who can't answer my questions. I got to answer my own questions. To now, I'm sort of back in the tribal knowledge space, but um, having learned the bitter lessons at Divvy and Bill, I feel now like uh, I have a better sense of here are the things that I actually need to capture that will be of service to either like future Josh or just like future folks who join DOS, who I don't want to have the experience of coming in and being like, well, what the hell is going on and what is any of this stuff? And thankfully, we use Notion pretty heavily here, and Notion AI with like call recording and all the enterprise AI features that Notion has released over the past couple of years have made it so much easier to capture all of this stuff and to keep it organized. Because like circa 2023, if you looked at like the old Divi Notion, like unless you have people who are really staying on top of it, it just like entropy pulls it into a really chaotic, disorganized place. And thankfully, like we're pretty on top of that right now, and I fingers crossed that that will remain the case.
I loved hearing that journey. And yeah, hypergrowth is unbelievable when you're part of that journey and you're on the rocket ship. It's like everything's going out the window every other day. So I definitely
It was
have
gnarly.
felt, yeah, have felt that journey before. I loved what you were getting in there towards the end though about your current workflow. Like how, reflecting on your journey and everything you've done so far, like what does your workflow look like today, going from like, hey, we've got this new feature idea to getting that shipped out into code with your engineers.
Um, that's still evolving, truth be told.
Mhm.
So we have had a couple of front end hires um, over the last little bit. And in the first stretch of me being at DOS, a lot of what I focused on actually is like marketing and brand design because there's been a huge like backlog of stuff that has needed to happen. And so a lot of it has been like icon designs and logo designs and web designs, which has all been like new and challenging and fun. So I'm like just over the last little bit starting to dig into like, okay, got all this marketing stuff done, like time to sort of refocus on like the UI and the core software experience of DOS, and just starting to get like my working relationship with our front end engineers figured out, and like finally getting my cursor and Claude code environment set up, and so a lot of what I'm doing right now is having like pretty informal conversations with engineers where like we will jam on a concept together. Either like we're shooting Slack messages back and forth if they're like working on a thing, or I'm working on a thing and we can't like sit side by side, or like we'll sit down and have a conversation about like, hey, I mentioned we're in a period where we're starting to like trying to formalize and componentize some of the stuff that shows up everywhere. Um, and a lot of that is like I'll sit down side by side with an engineer and we'll talk about like, hey, this last thing that we worked on, like I don't have context for what this looks like in the code base, but like when you were working on this feature like prior to me, what are the things that showed up that were annoying that you had to make decisions about like every time you worked on them? Like where do we need to systematize? And like what are the things that I can get you that are going to be the most helpful up front? Um, excuse me. And then what I'm doing right now is just like, can I spin up something in Figma that answers those questions or like gets us 0 to 1? If yes, I will try to do it in Figma as quickly as I can. If not, then I'll like just crack open a text editor and like rough out, here's a rough version of this thing. Specifically, like right now, we're trying to get just like the basics of our, like, here is our standard CSS theme that we're going to use everywhere, sorted, and starting to like inject that into all the places that it's been like, yeah, we were just writing a bunch of like inline CSS. Um, and so that has been like, here's this big ass text snippet, and we're like shooting that back and forth. Like, what if we made this changes? Cool, yeah, I think this looks good. Push that and like send me like prod where this is. Like send me his staging link. Let's look at this. Cool, this looks good. this still sucks. Like, let me come in here, make a handful of changes. Like, what does this look like? And it's like very quick and messy and iterative right now. And I expect that as we transition from like, hey, there are some things that we just like need to clean up as a baseline and a few things that we need to formalize and standardize, to like, we are in the early beta stages of releasing our like DOS bot, which is the AI layer that's going to start to interact with all of the little ERP elements, where it's, I now have a bot that I can talk to be like, hey, what's going on with my inventory? Like, am I close to hitting a stock out on any of my, my inventory? Um, that is where I expect that our, like, my workflow is going to change quite a bit. And the way that I'm interacting with engineers is going to change quite a bit. I expect to be in code way more. Um, because what I've realized is when you're working with AI and you're working with something that is as, I don't know, like malleable, like I almost think of working with uh, this phrase that that you've, I'm sure, have heard a lot amongst designers who have been working with AI, is like AI as a material.
Mhm.
Like, it almost feels like a non-Newtonian fluid to me, where it's like it's so amorphous and like you basically can't work with it in Figma. Like, sure, can I refine the details of like what the actual thing looks like? Yes. But the experience, like, I just expect that I'm gonna be in Cursor and like making tweaks to this thing, and like gonna be sitting side by side with engineers to figure out like, does this work? Does this feel good? Because I just don't think there is any way in a static environment to even approach like modeling out what this experience will be like and making sure that the ergonomics of it work for the the scale and the breadth of operations that it needs to work for, like for our customers that span a ton of industries. Um, in fact, there's a story that I can tell you about like just a microcosm of this kind of thing that I ran into at Bill, that like completely changed. Like, it was the thing that made me realize like, holy shit, I should be out of Figma as much as possible for the rest of my career, and like in code tools as much as possible for the rest of my career. When one of the last things I worked on at Divi and Bill was like in what was classically the Divi product, which was eventually rebranded to Bill Spend and Expense. Uh, we use the UI paradigm of like, when you click into the details of a thing, most of those details like live in a slide out drawer, right? You've seen it in Stripe, you've seen it in Ramp. It's like pretty common UI pattern. Over time, that drawer just got so gummed up with like different people piling shit in there that it was like, okay, we got to redesign this whole thing because it's a mess. Um, and it handled everything from like, here are the details of the transaction, to like, here are the details of the merchant, to like, here are some thumbnails of the receipts that are attached, and like, here's a giant preview of the receipt images. And like, the way that it's implemented right now is like, here's a huge scrim that covers like the rest of the screen, and here's your like ham-handed rendering of your receipt. So there were a ton of things that I was just like, okay, we need to clean these things up about the experience. We need to clean these things up just about the aesthetics of the drawer so it doesn't look like shit. Um, and we did a bunch of static design in Figma, and we were all happy with the way that it looked. And then as soon as we put it in code, we realized that if you attached a PDF, the way that it rendered in like the preview pane in the drawer was completely illegible. It's too small. Couldn't read it.
Mhm.
And it was the kind of thing that like, there would have been no way to predict that before it was in code. And we wasted so much time like specking out all of the details just to realize like, oh shit, this doesn't work. We got to go back to the drawing board about a fundamental part of this redesign that we spent months on because of this like code reality that we never could have anticipated when we were like working with static designs, and even like doing our due diligence of like we were really putting this stuff in front of customers and like gauging, does this work? And like, yeah, it all works when it renders at the proper size, but like as soon as you're like, oh well, our PDF, like our PDF package, our library that we're using, like uh renders this as like, it doesn't change the PDF to an image and then render the image. It's like actually rendering what's in the PDF. And like that package is several versions like removed from the version of React that we're using. And so there's like no way that we could change this thing. It would, it would take a year to get those packages to be on the same like version. And it was just like a completely intractable problem the way that it was. And so like we had to go back to the design drawing board. And I was like, that was like the moment that convinced me like, okay, never again. Like this is the kind of thing that we're going to tackle early. We're going to tackle it in code. And like, I need to be responsible for spinning these kinds of like quick and dirty prototypes up so we can like get a sense for what does this look and feel like in reality. And uh, that is the sort of analog or the prologue to how I expect to treat AI experiences in the context of this ERP that we're building. Because like there are just so many things that are going to be impossible to anticipate unless we are working with live code. And so that's that is how I expect work moving forward. Is like, yeah, for little visual detail thing, cool. I'll jump into Figma, we'll make it work. Little interaction things, like sweet. Figma Make is awesome at that. Like get in there, tweak these things, prototype them up, get our easings just right, make it look fancy and sweet. But for the core experience of like, here's how you're interacting with an LLM, uh, we're going to be in there. Claude Code and Cursor, and I don't know if someone comes along and displaces them as like the best set of tools for like actual production code. Maybe we use that, but that's that's what I plan on being my workflow for. I mean, until a better way to do it comes along.
Absolutely. I love how you framed everything there. And I felt this myself too, because AI is non-deterministic. It's just like you don't know what you're
Yes.
going to get, right? You're like, oh wait, it's like you're pulling the roulette wheel or the spin of the slot machine. You're like, it's going to be a little different than it was last time. I don't know how, but it
Mm-hmm.
will be. And you're so right. Like trying to replicate or simulate that in Figma or static tools is impossible. It's you might as well just go straight to the code and start designing there, because otherwise it's a nightmare and you can't. And even with I think back maybe like 3 or even 5 years ago when I think there was a big movement to like inject real data into Figma of like,
Mm-hmm.
use like production data or staging data in your designs. So you're designing with real information. Um, and
And what
that
was
like
that
that
plugin
information.
called? Kernel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that was a big deal because before
Oh
then it was
yeah.
Lorem Ipsum was a big thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Still
Hook
is,
up your
but
spreadsheet. Jam it
yeah.
in there. Yeah.
And now it's like you can't even really do that anymore. There's like no good way to fake or simulate that experience. And so I'm with you 100%. I think more and more people are just going to be designing in or with code close to the metal as you can get. Um, kind of thinking about that a little bit more. What's been like your favorite thing that you've designed recently?
Um, so this actually has nothing to do with code. Um, this has been one of the outputs of the early like marketing and brand design stuff that I've done with DOS. We just hosted our first sort of like little conference. We called it DOSCon 1. And I had to design a logo for this thing. Like we needed to brand it. Um, and I I have never designed like a proper logo for anything before. Like, yeah, I've done like little icons here and there, and those are their own kind of frustrating. Bounding box in like 4 lines, you would never think it'd be as hard as it is. But um, with this DOSCon 1 thing, I just happened to be scrolling through Twitter one day, and I came across uh like a 3-second video clip that showed the evolution of the ARPA logo into the DARPA logo. DARPA
Hmm.
being, I think it's like Defense Advanced. research projects something with an A, which is like some, I don't know like what function of our government that was like in the like 60s and 70s, but it was this kind of like old school like globe icon with like the DARPA across it. And because the logo was so old, it was kind of like fuzzed out. Um, and I saw that and immediately I was like, okay, screen grab that. That looks cool. Um, and just started like messing with that concept uh to like get a logo together, and the like fuzziness of it led me to like, yeah, like I want this to look like a CRT monitor. And so like I started with this sort of like CRT green, and then uh shout out to the Figma team, and specifically the Figma draw team, like started to mess with like some noise and texture in there to make it look like it was actually sitting against a CRT screen. In fact, I can like share really quickly like what that there was like a key visual that we shared out just to like get people excited about it.
Yeah, we love that.
uh yeah, let's see if I can get screen share to be friendly and behave here. All right, let's see if I can make this work. All right, yeah.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, this was our DOSCon one logo, and you know, sure, you put this up against like the kind of stuff that Smith Addiction puts out, or any of like freelance brand designers or brand studios, and yeah, it fails in comparison. But as like, this is my first logo, and I was like pretty proud of it. And it was especially cool to see it show up on a bunch of like the peripheral bits and pieces of this like DOSCon conference, where it was on like coffee cup things, and it was like on the dinner menu, and like on the agenda. And it was this is like one of the few instances where I've been able to see something that I designed like in the physical world
Hmm.
show up in a bunch of places. So that was a ton of fun. And I was fiddled with this for a while. I was pretty pleased with the sort of like retro computer aesthetic that we were able to pull off. So that was a ton of fun, and probably one of my favorite things that I have designed, at least in the last couple of months. I was proud of baby's first little logo.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. It's such a, it packs a punch. That's a strong visual identity and vibe, and just, it really grabs your attention. So thank you so much for sharing. What I also loved in that story is like you're you're at like quote unquote product designer, but you're jumping into
Oh
brand
yeah.
design, right? Like you're jumping into marketing, you're jumping into graphic design. I've heard different takes on this. Some folks are like, stay in your lane. Product design is only supposed to do product design. Why are they asking me to do all this other stuff? And other folks who are like, if you're telling me to design something, I'm going to make it happen, and I'm going to learn something new, and it's going to be exciting and engaging. Like, where do you fall? I think I know your answer, but where do you kind of fall on your spectrum, and how do you approach kind of requests that are beyond maybe your quote unquote job description?
So I can absolutely respect the mindset of like, I do product design. I want to spend all of my time and effort like focusing on being excellent at this one thing. And like when I go take a job, my expectation is that like I am working on this thing, and rejecting anything that's outside of that scope. Totally fine. Um, my attitude is design found me. Like design as a discipline found me, and was the answer to like a deep desire for a medium to express what I believe to be my innate skill set that had just never found uh, any place to express itself. And so, I'm almost like referring to design as being like its own entity here, but because it found me, I feel like I owe this deep debt of gratitude to design as a discipline. And that as part of that gratitude, I owe a dedication to become like the most complete designer that I can be. And for me, that means every discipline of design that I can get my hands on, like, go, just learn it, just dive in. There are times where I wish I could go back in time and like grab my 18-year-old self by the shoulders and say, "Don't study mechanical engineering. That's a mistake. You might like math and physics, but it's not for you. Go study graphic design. Learn all the like type, color, and layout stuff that will make your career so much easier." Instead, I'm like, I'm this many years in, and I feel like I'm learning still these elementary pieces of graphic design as a discipline. And it's super hard and super frustrating because like the taste skill gap is so wide right now. But one of the reasons that I was excited to take this job at a startup where I knew that like because the designer that preceded me was like on maternity leave, that I would be joining and it was just going to be me. And so out of the gate, I was going to be doing very little product design and pretty much exclusively focused on like brand, marketing, web. That was a terrifying notion to me, but it was like the thing that made me maybe most excited out of the gate. I was like, hell yeah, I've never had a good forcing function yet to learn these things. And being pushed into that has been so fun and so rewarding. And like, if there is anyone who's like early in their career and is thinking about like, oh, well, like, do I need to just like stick to my lane? Like, if you have even an inkling of interest in disciplines of design that are outside of what you consider yourself like good at or most interested in, if you have even the littlest bit of interest, go do it, go try it, like go learn. um my hope is that like in a year or two from now, I'll be able to produce like sick stuff for DOS that like makes me look back on this and go, holy shit, like I can't believe when I was doing, the DOSCon 1 logo. Because to me, like I designed for the love of the game. I love this shit. I I love it. And so and careers are long. And so I love that I can spend years just like getting better at every little facet of design. And like, you know on the horizon or like in the next little bit, I'm like, oh yeah, motion has been in the back of my head. It's like, once we get into this AI world, man, like motion is going to be so much more important than all these little interactions. And like, you know uh, all I've done is like smart animate 300 milliseconds, ease in and out. Like there's so much more to it. And so that's the long and windy way of saying, from my standpoint, a complete designer uh, eschews any sort of product designer, web designer, brand designer. Like my aspiration is when someone asks me what I do, I can say I'm a designer. I work in a tech company and I'm a designer. And they ask me, what do you design? And I can just say yes, all of it. If something needs to be designed, I can design it. May not be an expert at all of it, but I can do it all. Because that's to me is like what it means to be a designer, and that's my aspiration.
I'm probably not the only one sitting here with goosebumps, but I loved all that. That definitely resonates with my experience as well. And it's funny, I love what you were saying towards the end there. I was talking to one of my co-founders the other day, and it's your careers go in cycles. It's unbelievable. It's and we're trying to solve a hard problem the other day, and I was like, oh, this is just like those other two tie-ins where something similar popped up, and we're just going to remix it and apply it to our context. But if I hadn't have branched out previously and pushed myself to go beyond, the job description or the box that I was in at that time, I wouldn't be able to solve this problem we have today. And uh, I'm always sort of that same mindset of like, let's do everything, grab it all, make it happen, because that's where the fun is. That's where you push
Yes,
yourself 100%.
that's the stuff that's fun. That's why it's
Hmm.
fun to be a designer, because there's just like infinite stuff.
Hmm. Love that. Well, I know we are sadly coming up on time here, although I
Holy
think we could
crap!
talk for
Yeah, that's gone
hours.
by fast.
Um, is there anything you want everybody to who's tuning in to check out before we go?
Well, I, I'd make a specific plug if you are an engineer in the San Francisco Bay Area and you want to work with a team that has an insane talent bar that is working on really hard problems because ERP software is really hard. and anything that I have said over the course of the last hour makes you think that like you would have fun working with me, come reach out to me on Twitter, Josh Designs XYZ. Look up DOS.com, reach out. Would love to hear from you. Would love to potentially like have you come in and be part of the team and build some really cool, really difficult stuff together. So that's my plug. If you're an engineer and any of this stuff sounds cool, reach out. Would love to meet you.
Amazing. Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Nick. This has been a lot of fun. I'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely.